Have you noticed that when we talk about Europe, the same names always come up? France, Italy, Spain, England, even smaller countries like Switzerland and the Netherlands easily make it onto the itinerary. But there's a corner of the continent that almost no one remembers, even though it's right in the heart of Europe. I'm talking about Bosnia and Herzegovina. Some people have never even heard of it, and those who have usually only remember the war. After all, it was here that one of the most explosive and tragic stories on the continent unfolded in recent decades. But Bosnia is much more than conflict. It is a melting pot of peoples, religions, and cultures. It is a bridge between East and West, a small country full of big stories. And since almost no one knows about it, today Bello Mundo will cross the Balkans and introduce you to the nation that almost no one knows. Number 1. Location and general information. Bosnia and Herzegovina is located in southeastern Europe, right in the heart of the Balkan Peninsula. It borders Croatia, Serbia, and Montenegro. And although few people know it, the country does have a small stretch of coastline on the Adriatic Sea. It's only 20 kilometers long, but it's enough to guarantee access to the sea. The country is small, covering just over 19,000 square miles, and has a population of around 3.5 million people, roughly the same as Iowa. But despite its size, the terrain is anything but simple. The country is marked by mountain ranges, deep valleys, dense forests, and rivers that cut through everything from north to south. It is the kind of place that impresses with its beauty, but has always been difficult to dominate. And right in the middle of all this geography is Sarajevo, the capital, which is not just any capital, but we'll talk about that in a moment. And about the name. Although Bosnia and Herzegovina sounds like two countries, they are not. Herzegovina is only the southern part of the territory, a historical region that has always been close to Bosnia. In practice, the country is one, just with a compound name. Now that you know where it is, the most complicated and sad part begins: its history. Number 2. History. Without a doubt, this place has one of those stories that could fill an entire Netflix series. One of those that begins in 1 century, spans 5 empires, ends in war, and no one really understands what happened. For centuries, this region was a hotbed for the empires that ruled Europe. The territory that today forms Bosnia and Herzegovina was once occupied by Slavs, Romans, Ottomans, Austro-Hungarians, and half a dozen other kingdoms. The result is that no one there has exactly the same past, nor the same faith. Today, the country's population is made up of 3 major ethnic groups: the Bosnians, most of whom follow Islam; the Serbs, linked to the Orthodox Church; and the Croats, who are Catholic. In fact, in the south of the country, near the border with Croatia, Medjugorje became famous because of an episode that became a symbol of devotion. It was there that, starting on June 24th, 1981, 6 young people said they saw the Virgin Mary. The figure became known as Our Lady of Medjugorje, or Queen of Peace. The site has become one of the main religious pilgrimage destinations in the Balkans, and in August 2024, the Vatican officially recognized the devotions linked to the shrine, highlighting the spiritual fruits generated there, even without yet issuing a final verdict on the supernatural character of the apparitions. In other words, there are 3 peoples, 3 religions, 3 different cultures, all within the same territory. For centuries, these groups coexisted under the rule of foreign empires. But it was only in the 20th century, with the end of World War I, that things began to get organized, or at least attempted to. In 1918, the Kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes was formed, a complicated name for an even more complicated country. Later, it would become Yugoslavia, which literally means land of the Southern Slavs. After World War II, Yugoslavia became a socialist republic led by Marshal Tito. It was then that Bosnia officially became one of the 6 republics that formed the federation. Despite all the ethnic and religious differences, Tito held everyone together through his charisma and military control, until Tito died. And with him, the glue that held this whole mixture together also died. Number 3. The war that divided everything. In the 90s, the map of Europe began to change again. Yugoslavia, which for decades had kept different peoples united, began to fall apart, and each republic wanted to go its own way. Bosnia and Herzegovina also decided to become independent. It held a referendum in 1992 and officially declared that it wanted to leave Yugoslavia. But there was a problem, or rather, several problems. The country was made up of Bosnians, Croats, and Serbs, and the Serbs, who did not want to separate from Yugoslavia, did not accept independence. That was when one of the most complex and violent wars in recent European history began. For 3 years, between 1992 and 1995, Bosnia became the scene of a brutal civil war. The fighting was not only between armies, it was between neighbors, schoolmates, and even families divided by religion. Serbian, Croatian, and Bosnian militias fought for territory. And in the midst of it all, civilians paid the price. Entire cities were destroyed, thousands of people died, and thousands more were forced to flee their homes. One of the saddest episodes, and one that still haunts the country's memory, was the Srebrenica massacre in 1995. More than 8,000 Muslim men and boys were murdered by Serbian troops in a region that, in theory, was protected by the UN. The massacre was recognized as genocide by international courts. And as heavy as the subject is, it helps to understand why Bosnia today is so marked by division. The war only ended with an agreement signed in the United States, called the Dayton Agreement, also in 1995. This agreement ended the fighting, but created one of the most confusing political systems on the planet. Number 4. The division. When the war ended, peace came, but it came in that way. The Dayton Agreement created such a complex structure that even today few people understand exactly how this country works. Bosnia and Herzegovina became divided into 2 main entities: the Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina, where Bosnian Muslims and Croats live, and the Republika Srpska, dominated by Bosnian Serbs. Each of these entities has its own government, parliament, police, and even flag. It is almost as if they were 2 countries within one. But there is still a third element, the Brčko district. This region is a kind of neutral zone, administered separately, as if it were a parallel capital, although the official capital remains Sarajevo. And as if all this were not complicated enough, Bosnia's central government has 3 presidents at the same time. Because to represent this political tripod, you need an institutional juggling act that would make any political scientist's hair stand on end. Number 5. Different presidents. If it is already difficult to govern a country divided between 3 peoples, imagine trying to do so with 3 presidents at the same time. That is exactly what happens in Bosnia and Herzegovina. There is something called the Tripartite Presidency, which means 3 people occupying the head of state at the same time. One represents the Bosnian Muslims, another represents the Catholic Croats, and the third represents the Orthodox Serbs. They take turns in the leadership every 8 months, but they all remain in office making decisions together. In theory, this was created to ensure balance. In practice, it looks more like a condominium meeting where no one wants to pay for the gate to be repaired, but everyone wants to complain about the broken gate. In other words, to approve anything, consensus is required. But in a place where the wounds of war are still open, consensus is a rare word. And there's one more detail. There is a position called High International Representative, an envoy from the UN and Western powers who has the authority to intervene when things come to a standstill, like an international building manager. And yes, he is still active today. The idea behind all this was to maintain political balance and ensure peace. But what we see in practice is a country stuck, caught up in disputes and with a bureaucracy that drives you crazy. To give you an idea, it took Bosnia more than 11 years just to pass a single identity law. That's right, more than a decade discussing what the country's identity document would look like. Meanwhile, young people continue to leave, investors lose interest, and tourists are confused, trying to understand how such a beautiful place can be so complicated. But even so, the country moves forward, not because it has an efficient system, but because it has people who insist, resist, and try to make it work, even with all the obstacles. And amid so much political division, there is still room for tradition, culture, and beauty. And there is no better place to symbolize all this than the capital, Sarajevo. Number 6. Sarajevo. But when the war broke out, everything turned upside down. After Bosnia declared independence from the former Yugoslavia, Sarajevo became the main target of attacks. The city was besieged for almost 4 years. There were more than 1,400 days of siege, shootings, and bombings. Residents hid inside their homes and, when they needed to go out, they ran across the streets with bags in front of their bodies, trying to protect themselves from snipers positioned in the mountains. This region became known as the Sniper's Alley. More than 11,000 people died during this period, among them almost 2,000 were children. But even under siege, the city did not bow down and found ways to survive the chaos. There were orchestra concerts amid the ruins, improvised fashion shows in basements, and plays staged with candles and courage. And then there was the Sarajevo Tunnel, a passage dug by hand under the airport runway, just over 2,600 feet long and 5 feet high. It was through this tunnel that tons of rice, supplies, medicines, newspapers, and hope passed. The tunnel still exists and is now a museum, but at that time it was synonymous with survival. And perhaps what is most impressive is the city's decision not to hide its scars. To this day, many buildings still bear the marks of gunfire on their facades. Some have perforations on every floor. And on the ground, scattered throughout the central region, are the so-called Roses of Sarajevo, red marks painted exactly where bombs and missiles fell during the siege. One of them is right next to the entrance to the Catholic Cathedral in the tourist heart of the city. The shrapnel is still there, embedded in the concrete, and tourists always stop, take pictures, film, or simply observe in silence. Even with so much trauma, Sarajevo has never ceased to be a melting pot. The minarets of the mosques are still there, side by side with the towers of Catholic churches and Orthodox domes. As if to say, we fought, we bled, but no one left. Today, Sarajevo tries to balance all of this. There are hipster cafes next to buildings scarred by war. There is a university full of young people, and next to it, urban wounds that have not yet healed. It is a city that does not deny its past, but also does not want to be remembered only for that. Number 7. The bridge, the jump, and the symbol. If Sarajevo is the brain of Bosnia, Mostar is its postcard. This charming little town in the south of the country looks like something out of a fairy tale, with its stone alleys, shops full of colorful rugs, and the Neretva River cutting through the middle. But what really catches the eye there is the Starry Most, or in English, Old Bridge. Built in the 16th century when the region was part of the Ottoman Empire, the bridge became a symbol of the city. More than just a path between two banks, it represented the connection between cultures, religions, and peoples. However, during the Bosnian War, the bridge was destroyed. Bombed until it collapsed in 1993, it became rubble floating in the river, an image that went around the world and became a perfect metaphor for what was happening to the entire country, bridges being broken, literally. But the story did not end there. After the war, the bridge was rebuilt stone by stone, following the same original design, with the help of engineers from around the world. And in 2004, it was reopened with pomp, tears, and applause. Today, Starry Most is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and in addition to being a symbol of unity, it has also become the stage for one of Bosnia's most exciting rituals. Every summer, local young people gather there for a challenge that is half crazy, half tradition. They climb to the top of the bridge, which is almost 82 feet high, make the sign of the cross, beat their chests, and throw themselves into the icy river. It's a free fall that lasts seconds, but is worth a lifetime. But Bosnia is not just Sarajevo and Mostar. The country has surprising corners that few people know about. Number 8. Places. Near Mostar, for example, is Blagaj, a tiny village clinging to a cliff where an old dervish monastery seems to have been carved directly into the rock. Just below, the source of the Buna River springs forth, with crystal-clear waters flowing right at the foot of the building. It is one of those places that seem to have stopped in time, with scenery worthy of a movie. And for those who love wild nature, Sutjeska National Park is a treat. There are untouched forests, dramatic mountains, and trails that wind through canyons and deep valleys. It is a refuge for those seeking silence, raw landscapes, and pure air in its raw state. Now, if the idea is to see the deepest Bosnia, Lukomir is the right destination. Nestled high in the Bjelašnica Mountains, this village is considered the highest permanent village in the country. Stone houses with wooden roofs, sheep grazing in the fields, wool drying in the sun, coffee brewed on a wood stove, and a pace of life that ignores the clock. There, time does not pass. It rests. And in the midst of it all, the Šteci appear. These are medieval tombstones carved in stone, with mysterious inscriptions, figures of dancers, crosses, swords, moons, and rosettes. Scattered throughout Bosnia and Herzegovina, and also in neighboring countries, these tombs date from the 12th to the 16th centuries. In 2016, a group of 28 archaeological sites with about 4,000 pieces was recognized by UNESCO as a World Heritage Site. It's practically an open-air lesson on a Balkan Middle Ages that the world has almost forgotten. And since we're talking about coffee, it's one of the elements that keeps Bosnian culture alive today. Number 9. Culture, strong coffee, and beliefs. Bosnia has something rare these days. Tradition is not just a museum piece, it is alive in everyday life. And you can see this in the music, in the way people speak, in the customs that are passed down from generation to generation, and even in the coffee. There is a typical musical style there called Sevdalinka. It is slow, somewhat sad music, reminiscent of heartbreak. It mixes Ottoman melodies with sorrowful lyrics. It speaks of impossible loves, farewells, war, religion, and even if you don't understand a word, you can feel the mood. This same intensity appears even in the simplest things, like coffee. Here, drinking coffee is not a habit. It is a ritual. It is not like the quick coffee we drink between appointments. There, sitting down to drink coffee means stopping time, talking, listening, being in company. The tradition came with the Ottomans in the 15th century, but the Bosnians created their own way. The coffee, called bosanska kafa, is prepared in a small copper pot called a jezva and served strong, thick, with a dense foam on top. It always comes with a small glass of water and some sweets, such as rahat lokum, which is Turkish gum candy, or cubes of crystal sugar. But the most curious thing is the way they sweeten it. The sugar does not go in the cup. The custom is to bite a piece of sugar and let the coffee pass through it while drinking. Different, isn't it? Bosnia and Herzegovina is not an obvious destination. It is not in the best-selling guidebooks, nor in the most popular itineraries in Europe. But perhaps, precisely for this reason, it deserves more attention. So now we want to hear from you. Had you heard of Bosnia in this way before? Tell us in the comments what surprised you the most. And of course, if you enjoyed the trip, leave a like, subscribe to Bello Mundo, and activate the bell. Because in the next episode, we'll continue exploring this big world together.